Canadian history. And I'd like to sort of get back by what Doug Cheung says about none of the rights and privileges we enjoy now. For myself, I really can't understand what it's like to live under those conditions. And I was talking to Gim just a little earlier, and he said, even at that time, it was not possible to become a newspaper boy, that Chinese people could not become newspaper boys. Could you articulate on what it was like living during that period between the 30s and 40s?
Well, there's too much to cover, Sid. I'll just go chronologically as quick as I can. I remember the first bit of paraphernalia of my childhood was a photograph folder, a palm-sized photograph, and it had a tiny picture of a 1-year-old boy, and I asked my mother who that was, and she said, "That's you." So I looked at the big-eyed kid, you know, and shy-looking little kid, and I said, "What the hell's..." So I read it, and it says, under British Columbia law, the registration of this Chinese person as conforming to bylaw so-and-so. And then I flipped it over, and it says, this does not apply any legal status. And that was taken when I was 1 year old. Now, I remember going to school at Strathcona when I was first went to school when I was, 6? And we spoke no English. And we had a tough time. It was always spat upon and peed upon, you name it, beat up every day. And I grew up around the Cambie and 6th area, predominantly Japanese, and I was beaten up regularly there in the 30s because of the Japanese and the Chinese War in China. And I was the first Chinese admitted to Crystal Pool in 1942, I think.
What is that, Crystal Pool?
Crystal Pool was down English Bay there, and it was exclusively white.
You mean a swimming pool?
Swimming pool, yes.
Oh, really?
Indoor swimming pool. I got in there because Father McCarthy of the Chinese Catholic Mission, he took me and Dave Joe and Jimmy Wing and a few others down there from our boxing club, and we were the first Chinese admitted there, but none of us can swim. That's another thing I remember, and I was teaching young men at the Vancouver Tech, model aircraft construction and so forth, which I was very good at, and I couldn't join the Air Cadets. Don't even ask him, because you won't be accepted. And similarly, when I tried to join the Air Force, they didn't want you. And the first question the administering, the officer that was talking to me, what do you call it? And you know, the admission officer, he said, the first question he asked me was, you don't have to join, Mr. Wong. What the hell do you want to join for? And you have to explain yourself. You have to beg to get in.
Oh, yeah.
So things like that I remember. And as I said, you know, I applied with other friends to deliver the newspapers, anything to make a buck. And Chinese were not allowed.
Yeah. Well, let me interrupt you here. These days, when you have children, you say you want them to grow up to be doctors, lawyers, engineers, nurses, teachers, this and that. What did you at that time? You know that you could go to university, but you could never practice the profession. Is that correct? Oh, okay. Well, sure, right.
In those days, they say graduation from university is the day you stand on the breadline. Because for Chinese or any visible minority, your chance was absolutely nil. In the olden day, the saying was, you don't have a Chinaman's chance. Now, what is the Chinaman's chance? I've already described the political and social conditions of the time. I mean, social and political and economic conditions of the time. Now, let me briefly talk about this social conditions. They had segregated school for a while back in the as late as 1920s and early 30s. As Kim mentioned, public facilities like the swimming pool, you know, paid for by a taxpayer. No, we can't use it. You're out of bound. And as far as accommodation goes, they have restrictive covenants in Shaughnessy Heights and Buddhist properties. No Chinese were allowed to own properties in those areas. And in theaters, they rope off a section, for the visible minorities. So a Chinese girl can't be accepted as telephone operator. If she's lucky enough to make it as a sales clerk at a department store, she'd be making headlines. And those were the conditions. And about white lunch. The name of white lunch means all white help, no Oriental help. So those were the conditions that we were forced to live under at that time.
Yeah. Actually, another thing, maybe I'll direct this to Harry. Another thing that occurred to me as I was talking at that time with Chinese exclusion, there were no women allowed, there weren't any women allowed, Chinese women allowed into the country during that period unless they were merchants and very well off. I would suspect that during your day and age, at the height of your young years, what did you do about dating? Harry?
Well,
I mean, women are very important in this world.
it is.
I think there were a few Chinese families, and there were, but the proportion, the men were overwhelmingly outnumber the female population. So I think the only way they hope to get married is to go back to the Orient and
So that was
get a bride. Yeah.
You see, my father is a different type of Chinese way of thinking. My father has 3 brothers here, and he's the only one that married in Canada, and he married a Canadian-born Chinese girl back in the 1920s. And you see, my father, even though he married a Chinese Canadian girl in Canada, but he want us, he teaching us that Canada is not your true country because you don't have any right as any other person. So someday, when you grow up, you make enough money, you will go back to China. That's why, when I was a youngster, he brought the whole family to China. Because I'm Canadian-born, I could stay in China to learn some Chinese culture. But my father had to return back to Canada within 24 months. So he had to leave my mother and myself and my sister back in China. So when we come back to Canada in 1934, I can speak English. I have to start from the beginning. But now I see we said it before. All this is we don't have right to be Canadian until the Second World War, when we join and go overseas and come back, then the things start change. During that time, we don't have right. We are not Canadian. Even I was born here. Even my mother was born here. You see, she's not qualified to be a Canadian citizen. She got no right to vote.
Yeah. Actually, we're running out of time now, gentlemen, so thank you for being with us. And until we meet again, good day, health, happiness, and prosperity.
Don't need no Harriet, nor a 20-gallon hat.